An old man in a wheelchair sat alone. Ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie. Always the same table. Always the same silence. One day, three strangers laughed, mocked his service, filmed him, and the whole cafe watched. But then the door opened. 6 Marines walked in. And what happened next? Left the entire room silent. And the internet stunned. Welcome to TNM Incredible Story. Let's uncover what really happened. Every Friday afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the skyline of Charleston, an old man with silver hair rolled into a familiar street corner in a worn-out wheelchair. He was never early, never late, always at exactly 2 p.m., like a military timepiece programmed by loyalty and memory. The little cafe, Portside Brews, sat quietly near the harbor, a place that once launched military ships, now serving as a peaceful rest stop for those seeking solace in a noisy world. At table number 3, next to the large window overlooking the bay, the old man always chose his seat, not for the sunlight or the view, but for something deeper, something sacred. His name was Barry Romo. No one in the cafe really knew him. People called him with affectionate nicknames: Friday Man, Quiet Barry, or simply the Old Coffee Guy. Week after week, he ordered the same thing: a black coffee, no sugar, and a slightly overcooked slice of apple pie. Then he would sit in silence, eyes fixed on the harbor, hand resting on a small, weather-worn wooden box. The box wasn't big, just enough to fit in his lap, but it carried a weight no one could measure. That box, with its dark wood grain and tarnished lock, was the one thing he never let out of his sight. Some joked that if his house ever caught fire, it wouldn't be his wallet or his phone he'd save, it would be that box. No one knew what was inside, and no one dared ask. They only knew that when he placed his hand on the lid, his gaze would drift far away, as if speaking to someone who no longer lived in this world. Once, a little boy asked his mother, "Mommy, why does that man look so sad?" The mother gently replied, "Some people carry entire wars inside them, sweetheart." Staff came and went at Portside Brews over the years. Some stayed, some moved on. But to all of them, Barry was a special customer, not because he was famous, but because he was quietly extraordinary. Always polite, always left a small, neatly folded tip under the coffee cup. Always the same ritual. Today was a beautiful day. Sunlight danced on the water, and distant waves whispered like an old lullaby. But for Barry, the weather had never influenced his ritual. Today marked 5 years since he first wheeled himself into this cafe. 5 years, 60 months, over 260 Fridays at the same table, at the same time, looking at the same view. No one knew why. No one asked. But if you paid close attention, you'd notice he always looked in one specific direction, the spot where a military ship once left port, carrying his friends, his brothers, his soldiers, not all of whom returned. Barry Romo, once a proud Marine Corps sergeant, had commanded a unit during a mission in Syria, where in just 17 minutes, he lost 3 men under his command and both of his legs. The military watch on his wrist still ticked with perfect precision, its scratched face a silent witness to years of war. Barry glanced at it briefly, then turned back to the window. In the distance, a cargo ship sliced through the bay. He gave a slight nod. To others, it was just a commercial vessel. But to Barry, every ship was a symbol of departure, of sacrifice, of promises made and never forgotten. What was in the box? Perhaps medals. Perhaps photos. Maybe letters never mailed. Maybe small, priceless items, priceless not for their monetary worth, but because they once belonged to heroes who never came home. And maybe, just maybe, it held a promise. A promise Barry Romo had never once broken. The next chapter will show what happens when reverence is no longer a given, and when a modern world, obsessed with mockery, social media, and quick judgments, meets a man who gave everything to protect the sacred, honor. That Friday, the wind off Charleston Harbor smelled faintly of salt and sun-warmed ropes. Inside Portside Brews, the usual murmur of mid-afternoon peace reigned, coffee machines humming, cups clinking, soft jazz leaking through vintage speakers. But that day was different. A group of young men burst through the door, their energy brash, their voices a few notches louder than polite conversation. There were 3 of them, all in their 20s. Dressed like they'd just stepped out of a startup office. Fitted shirts, white sneakers, and phones glued to their hands. "Let's film this one," One said, smirking. Hashtag, Cafe Real Talk. People love raw stuff. Gotta go viral this week. They didn't see Barry at first. Or maybe they did, and just didn't care. He had already settled at table 3, just like every other week. The same cup of black coffee in front of him. The same slice of apple pie untouched. The same wooden box in his lap, as if his hands couldn't trust any surface but his own. Barry sat quietly, eyes on the horizon. The cafe's large windows framed the harbor like a painting. A freighter was being guided in by tugboats. His expression didn't change, but his breath, if one looked closely, had slowed to match the rhythm of the waves. Then came the laughter. Sharp, artificial. The kind of laughter that doesn't arise from joy, but from mockery. Bro, look, one of the young men snorted, pointing toward Barry's table. That guy's got a special card on his table. They walked closer, loud enough now for half the cafe to hear. Barry's small laminated sign sat upright. Veteran. Please serve gently. Oh no, one sneered. We've got ourselves a certified hero. A real G.I. Joe in a wheelchair. Gimme a break. The second man added, loud enough for all ears. My grandfather was in Nam. Never asked for handouts. Didn't need signs. Barry didn't move. His fingers tightened ever so slightly on the edge of his wooden box, then relaxed. His eyes remained on the harbor. From behind the counter, Naomi, young, sharp-eyed, and only a few weeks into her job, froze in place, holding a coffee pot. She looked at Barry, then at the 3 men. Her jaw clenched, but she hesitated. She didn't yet know what to do with injustice when it walked in wearing confidence. Hey, hero, the tallest one called out, emboldened by no response. What's in the box? War trophies? Participation medals? Still no answer. Barry blinked slowly, as if they weren't speaking to him at all. The third man lifted his phone and began filming. Live from Charleston, folks. Meet Captain America, still fighting for attention. Their laughter roared. A few customers glanced around uncomfortably. One man shifted in his seat. Another woman looked down at her book, pretending not to hear. No one spoke. Naomi took a step forward, voice trembling. Sir, I can talk to the manager. Or ask them to leave. Barry turned toward her, eyes calm, deep as a winter lake. That won't be necessary, he said softly. There was a time when words like theirs would have mattered to me. That time is gone. He turned back to his coffee. That single, dignified response, spoken without anger or ego, landed like a thunderclap in the silent cafe. But the men didn't stop. You hear that? The leader mocked. He's too noble to fight back. He tore a napkin from the dispenser, crumpled it, and flicked it casually into Barry's open box. It landed beside a faded photograph. The edge of a handwritten letter poked out from underneath. 4 words were visible in smudged ink. If I don't return. Barry's hand moved faster than expected, swift, silent, protective. He closed the lid of the box with deliberate precision, as if sealing away not just paper, but ghosts. For the first time, his expression changed, just slightly. His jaw tensed. A flicker of storm passed behind his eyes. But he said nothing. The men chuckled, high on cruelty. And outside, a woman who had been sitting in the corner rose quietly. She had watched the entire scene unfold. She pulled out her phone, stepped out the door, and began dialing. Inside, the laughter continued. But something was shifting. The air had changed. Like the moment just before the sky breaks. Naomi returned to the counter, blinking away tears she didn't fully understand. And Barry Romo? He did exactly what he always did. He watched the harbor. He drank his coffee. He waited for the moment, any moment, when silence would once again speak louder than noise. Outside, the harbor breeze grew stronger. Fluttering cafe napkins and rustling leaves along the sidewalk. Inside portside brews, a storm far quieter, but no less potent, was building. Barry Romo sat unmoved, though the echoes of mockery still hung in the air like smoke. The laughter had subsided into smug whispers, then silence. No one else had spoken. No one else had stood up. Naomi returned behind the counter, but her eyes never left Barry. She had seen something in him, not weakness, but an unshakable calm. The kind that only comes from walking through hell and returning not untouched, but unbroken. She poured another cup of coffee and brought it to him, hands slightly trembling. Sir, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Barry looked up, and for a moment, time seemed to pause. The clink of spoons, the hum of conversation all faded into the background. Don't be, he said gently. You've shown more courage than most. She nodded, barely managing a smile. Then her eyes drifted toward the box in his lap, the one he had guarded so fiercely. Can I ask? She began, then stopped herself. It wasn't her place. And yet, something about him invited honesty. Barry gave a faint smile. What's inside? He asked, reading the question from her silence. A few medals. Some photos. Things that don't look like much, but weigh a great deal. Naomi hesitated. They belong to people you served with. They were the people I served with, he said. What's left of them? Anyway, there was no bitterness in his voice. Just memory, clean, unembellished, and sacred. Barry opened the box just a crack. Naomi, almost without breathing, caught a glimpse. A bronze star. A worn leather poker chip. A yellowed photograph of 5 young Marines standing in front of a dusty armored vehicle, grinning like they had forever. A sonogram image. A folded American flag. Smaller than standard, meant to fit in a soldier's sleeve pocket. They each gave me something before we deployed, Barry continued. For luck, for love, for remembrance. And when they didn't come back, I kept them, because someone had to. Naomi blinked back tears. The noise from the young men behind her felt like another world now. Trivial, hollow, forgettable. Barry looked out the window again, eyes returning to the water, to the place where ships disappeared into the horizon. That ship, he said, nodding toward the bay. 5 years ago. It was the last place I saw some of them alive. We made a promise. If any of us made it home, we'd remember the others. And you do that here? Naomi asked. Every Friday, Barry nodded. Same table. Same time. Because they can't. Outside, a car pulled up slowly. Then another. The woman who had left the cafe earlier stood by the curb, speaking to someone on the phone, pointing gently through the window. Inside, Barry adjusted the wooden box with his fingertips, aligning it perfectly with the table's edge. His movements were slow but deliberate, like a ritual. No part of him trembled, though his hands bore the faint twitch of old nerve damage. It didn't matter. He had long ago learned to move with care. To walk through the world without asking for anything more than space to remember. Behind him, the men were laughing again. One of them had just uploaded the video to social media. Cafe Hero gets triggered, the caption read. Fake vet throws a fit. Their phones lit up. Notifications began to pour in. It's already getting views, one said. People love this stuff. But not everyone was watching with amusement. At the far end of the cafe, a man in his 50s, dressed in quiet earth tones, had been observing the whole scene from behind a newspaper. His posture straightened. His eyes narrowed as he caught a glimpse of Barry's box and the ribbon of a rarely awarded medal. He stood, left a few bills on the table, and slipped outside. Phone already pressed to his ear. Captain, he said, this is Dawson. You're not going to believe who I just saw. At Portside, Bruce. Yes, sir. Barry Romo. Still has that wooden box. No, sir. I'm certain. They're mocking him, sir. Yes. I'll wait. Back inside, Barry reached for his fork. It slipped from his fingers, landing on the ground just beyond the reach of his wheelchair. He paused, calculated the movement he'd need to retrieve it, weighed the space, the distance, the risk of bumping into others. He began the careful maneuver to reposition his chair. One of the young men saw this and laughed. Hey, hero, get it yourself, he shouted, triggering another round of cruel giggles. Naomi darted forward. Let me help you. It's all right, Barry said. His voice calm, firm. I'm used to it. And in that still moment, more powerful than any shout, more dignified than any medal, the cafe fell silent again. The kind of silence that tells you something has shifted. Something real is happening. And somewhere, just outside, the quiet hum of military engines was beginning to fill the air. The cafe air felt different now. Not tense, not chaotic. Just poised, as if the very walls of Portside Brews were holding their breath. The 3 young men, still high on their digital performance, hunched over their phones, watching likes and laughing over comments. Look, one of them whispered. Someone wrote, classic fake veteran vibe. They chuckled as if cruelty were currency. But outside, something else was moving. Down the narrow street leading to the harbor, 4 black SUVs approached in formation, their tinted windows reflecting the Charleston sun. Behind them, a command jeep rolled quietly, flying a small Marine Corps flag, its colors vivid against the gray pavement. Inside the cafe, Barry checked his watch. 3:15 p.m. 15 minutes left in his weekly ritual. He took a slow sip of coffee, as if no one had mocked him, as if no one had posted anything. But Naomi noticed the way his hand trembled. Not with fear, but with something weightier. Memory, perhaps, or the ache of everything left unsaid. She stood at the counter, her back straight, heart thudding. Something was happening. And though she couldn't name it, she could feel it. The first SUV door opened. A man stepped out, gray-haired, straight-backed, wearing the dress blues of a senior Marine Corps officer. He looked toward the cafe, eyes sharp, scanning through the front window. And when his gaze landed on Barry, he didn't hesitate. Inside, the door chimed softly as 6 Marines entered. One after another. Immaculate uniforms. Rows of ribbons. Medals gleaming. Not a word was spoken as they moved with practiced precision, forming a semicircle around Barry Romo's table. The cafe went still. Forks paused midair. Phones were slowly lowered. The oldest Marine, clearly the commander, stepped forward and rendered a crisp, perfect salute. Sergeant Major Romo, Alpha Company. 3rd Battalion, sir. His voice was clear, resonant, unshakable. We apologize for being late. Barry didn't move at first. Then he raised his hand in return, his salute slower, but no less precise. His expression didn't change, but in his eyes, something flickered. Recognition, gratitude, maybe even peace. The officer turned to the cafe, addressing everyone present. His voice was steady, but beneath it lived decades of emotion. This man, he began, led one of the most courageous rescue operations in modern Marine Corps history. Syria, 2015. Operation Broken Dune. 12 Marines pinned down. Cut off. Enemy fire closing in. Orders were to hold position until air support arrived. He paused, scanning the room. But Sergeant Major Barry Romo went in alone. Cleared 5 buildings by himself. Took 2 bullets to the chest. Refused medevac until every Marine was out. Shielded 2 wounded with his own body when the evac chopper came under fire. That's why he's in that wheelchair. That's why he's alive. That's why I'm alive. A gasp escaped from somewhere near the back. The officer reached into his coat and pulled out a small case, polished wood, lined in navy blue velvet. Inside lay a gleaming silver star. This medal was supposed to be presented years ago. He said, bureaucracy, delays, and Sergeant Major Romo refused every ceremony. Said he hadn't earned it unless they all came home. He turned to Barry and bowed his head, placing the medal gently into the old man's hand. But today, sir, we correct that mistake. The room was frozen in stunned silence. Then one of the younger Marines stepped forward, his voice trembling. Sir, you pulled me from a burning Humvee after we hit an IED. I never got to thank you. Barry looked up. His mouth opened, as if he might speak. But for a long moment, nothing came. When he finally did speak, his voice was quiet, but it filled the cafe like thunder. These honors, he said slowly, they belong to the ones who didn't come back. I carry this only because they can't. Naomi had moved to the side, her hands clasped over her chest, eyes wet. She wasn't the only one. Around the cafe, patrons wiped at their faces, some openly crying. The 3 men who had mocked Barry earlier, they now sat stiffly, pale, eyes fixed on their screens like children caught cheating. One of them stood, shaking. Sir, we didn't know. I'm sorry. I'll delete the video. Barry turned toward him, not with anger, not even disdain. Just truth. Leave it up. His voice was steady. Let people see what happens when we judge someone we don't understand. Maybe it'll make them think twice next time. The room held its breath again. And then, something remarkable happened. The cafe stood up, one by one. Not in applause, not in a frenzy, but in solemn, heartfelt respect. It was as if, for the first time, they truly saw the man who had sat among them every week for 5 years. Not just an old soldier in a wheelchair. Not just a quiet customer at table 3, but a fortress, a keeper of promises, a man who had walked through fire and come back to remember those who didn't. They say you can measure a man by the way others speak about him when he's gone. But sometimes, just sometimes, you can measure him by the silence that follows when he finally speaks. Barry Romo didn't need a microphone. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand because he couldn't. And yet, in that moment, no voice in Charleston carried more weight than his. The 6 Marines, medals gleaming against deep blue uniforms, remained standing around him. The silver star rested gently in Barry's palm, catching rays of sun from the cafe window. But Barry's eyes had already returned to the harbor, as if even this tribute, even this long-overdue honor, was less important than the silent names he still carried. The cafe stood still, unsure what to do with so much reverence at once. Then Naomi stepped forward, voice cracking through the stillness. "Sergeant Major Romo," she said softly, "your coffee and pie, they're on the house. From now on. Always." He looked up at her. A soft smile tugged at the corner of his lips, rare, almost shy. "I appreciate it," he replied, "but I'll pay like anyone else." Special treatment wasn't what I fought for. From the back of the room, the cafe manager, a young man in his late 20s, probably the same age as the hecklers, stepped forward. His hands trembled, but his spine was straight. "Sir," he said, "with respect, it's not about special treatment. It's about gratitude. And frankly, we owe you more than a slice of pie." Barry gave him a long, quiet look, then nodded once. Fair enough. It was the only deal he'd accepted that day. The three young men had not moved since the Marines entered. The color had drained from their faces. One of them, still clutching his phone, was frantically trying to delete the video. "Too late," his friend muttered. The video had already been shared. The comments were flooding in. Thousands of them. Most were furious. Some were tearful. A few simply read, "This is what a real hero looks like. God bless Barry Romo. We should be the ones asking him for forgiveness." The leader of the trio, still flushed with shame, took a slow step toward Barry's table. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Sir, I was wrong. We were wrong. I can't undo it, but I'm sorry." Barry studied him in silence for a long time. Then, just when the young man looked ready to shrink into the floor, Barry said, "You'll learn more from keeping that video up than from deleting it. Let people see what happens when we assume too much. Let them see how fast cruelty dies in the face of truth." It wasn't an insult. It wasn't revenge. It was education. Outside, the black SUVs waited silently. The Marines prepared to depart. One by one, they stepped forward and shook Barry's hand, exchanging brief words of brotherhood. No cameras. No cheers. Just quiet respect between men who knew what it meant to walk through the fire and still return carrying someone else's name. The senior officer was last to leave. "We'll be back next Friday," he said. "If that's acceptable." Barry didn't hesitate. "Table 3, 2 o'clock. Bring stories." They saluted one last time, then turned and marched out in unison, leaving the door swinging gently behind them. Inside, the room exhaled. Naomi leaned down beside Barry as he sipped the last of his coffee. She wiped at her eyes, embarrassed. "I should have done something sooner," she whispered, "when they were mocking you." I just froze. Barry looked at her with such softness it nearly broke her. "You did more than you think," he said. "You brought the coffee. You brought the kindness. And you gave me space to remember. That matters." She reached out without thinking and gently touched the corner of the wooden box. "What's really in here?" she asked. Barry's fingers brushed the lid, then slowly lifted it open. Inside were medals, yes, but not in display cases. They were tucked beside far more personal things. A faded Polaroid of 5 Marines playing cards in a desert tent. A red baseball, signed in black marker, cracked with age. A worn Zippo lighter with a small dent in the corner. A sonogram print with "For Daddy, come home safe" written in pen. A folded letter, yellowed and creased, addressed simply, "If I don't return." These belong to the ones who didn't come home, Barry said. Things they carried. For luck, for love. They gave them to me before we deployed. I promised to remember. Naomi couldn't find words, so she didn't speak. And Barry closed the box gently. "I come here every week to keep that promise," he said. "Because somewhere, somehow, they're watching, making sure I haven't forgotten." He wheeled himself away from the table. And one by one, the customers stood again. Not in command, not in ceremony, but in silent, shared acknowledgement of a truth they had all just witnessed. A quiet man, a wooden box, and a promise the world almost forgot to honor. A week had passed since silence became louder than mockery. Since truth stood upright in dress blues and saluted a man many had dismissed as ordinary. Since the quiet hero at table 3 became, finally, seen. Word of what happened at Portside Brews rippled far beyond Charleston. The video, meant to humiliate, instead became a tribute. It was shared by veterans groups, teachers, military families, and strangers who just needed to believe that dignity still held ground in a noisy world. Barry Romo, however, remained untouched by the headlines. He didn't need them, because the only attention he ever sought came from those who no longer had voices to speak their thanks. And so, the following Friday, at exactly 2 o'clock, he returned to his table by the window. Same as always. The harbor breeze, the sunlit dock, the freighter passing on the horizon, it was all the same. Except now, he wasn't alone. Table 3, once just a place, now bore a polished bronze plaque, reserved for those who remember, in honor of Sergeant Major Barry Romo and all who served. Beside it, a small frame held a photograph, captured by Naomi the week before, of Barry receiving the Silver Star from his former commander. The caption read, "Not all heroes wear their medals. Some carry them in silence." But it wasn't just Barry who returned that day. They came in quietly. Some in uniform. Most not. A man in his 70s with a cane and a ball cap that read Vietnam Vet. A woman in her 50s who had served as a medic in Desert Storm. A young man barely 30, fresh from a recent tour in Syria. Each of them approached Barry's table with a nod, a handshake, or simply a quiet semper fi. Naomi watched from behind the counter, her heart full. They pulled up chairs, but not to crowd him. They formed a circle, just a bit apart, an unspoken perimeter of respect. And slowly, a new ritual began. They shared stories, not of glory, but of grief and grit. They laughed, not the brittle laugh of internet fame, but the deep, weathered laughter of people who had seen too much and survived it. Some brought photographs. Some brought silence. All brought memory. And Barry? He listened. Sometimes he spoke. Often, he just nodded, his eyes misting at a name, a date, a joke only those in uniform would understand. The box on his lap sat open this time, and with each new visitor, it grew heavier. A unit coin from a Marine sniper in Fallujah. A dog tag from a soldier who lost his battle at home after coming back. A handwritten note on worn stationery that simply read, "To the one who made it, don't let them forget." Each item was placed gently into the box, as if depositing a piece of their own burden into someone they trusted to carry it well. And Barry did. He received them with reverence, not as mementos, but as entrusted memories. A living archive. By 3:30, when Barry usually finished his ritual and wheeled himself away, he lingered a moment longer. Across from him, the young Marine, Jacob, who had nearly died in that burning Humvee, raised his coffee in quiet toast. "To the ones not here." Barry nodded, then added softly, "And to those who carry them." Portside brews began to change in subtle, profound ways. Under Naomi's urging, they started a suspended coffee wall. Customers could prepay a drink or meal for any veteran who came in. The wall near the register filled quickly with sticky notes and scribbled hearts. "Coffee for someone who served, in memory of my dad. Lunch for a hero, with gratitude. A warm drink for a cold day. Thank you." A local carpenter offered to build a second table just like Barry's, one that could accommodate more wheelchairs, more stories, more memories. And so, Table 3 became 2 tables, side by side. Joined not by wood, but by purpose. Barry still came every Friday. Still ordered black coffee and apple pie. Still stayed for 90 minutes. The only difference now was the silence around him had become community. Even when he wasn't speaking, people listened. Even when he wasn't looking, people followed his gaze out toward the water. Because now, they too had learned to remember. Not just war stories. Not just medals. But the quiet act of showing up, week after week, year after year, to honor a promise. A promise made on a battlefield far from home. A promise sealed in blood and brotherhood. A promise Barry Romo never once forgot. In the weeks that followed, Portside Brews became more than a cafe. It became a story passed quietly from one person to another. A sacred stop for those who had served. A sanctuary for those who still carried unseen battles. Locals brought their children just to walk past Table 3. Veterans from neighboring towns made pilgrimages, not for fanfare, but for fellowship. And Barry Romo? He remained unchanged in the way that truly heroic things do. Every Friday, 2 o'clock, black coffee, apple pie, same weathered hands, same steady gaze, same wooden box, now heavier with the weight of other people's stories. And something else had changed too. The 3 young men who had once laughed so loudly, they never returned. But the video they posted, the one meant to humiliate, was left up. Not by mistake, by choice. It was now part of training materials in military sensitivity courses. It was played in schools during Veterans Week. It was used by organizations to teach about humility, judgment, and the cost of freedom. Not because Barry wanted attention, but because truth, once revealed, refuses to disappear. One afternoon, Naomi sat down across from Barry after her shift. The cafe had quieted. A breeze stirred through the door, carrying the scent of salt and sea. "I don't know how to say this," she began, "but you've changed the way I see everything." Barry tilted his head, curious. Naomi hesitated, then continued. "Before I met you, I thought heroes were loud, visible, medaled and celebrated. But now I think, maybe the real ones are just like you." He didn't answer immediately. He never rushed his words. Finally, he said, "Heroism doesn't need a stage. It needs a purpose." She nodded, and a place to sit. They shared a quiet smile. Then a child approached their table. A boy, no older than 10. Shy, nervous. He looked at Barry with wide eyes and clutched a folded paper in his hand. "My grandpa was a soldier," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "He died before I was born." He handed Barry the paper. It was a drawing crayon on notebook paper. A picture of a man in a wheelchair sitting by the sea, with a small wooden box in his lap. Above it, written in shaky block letters, "Thank you for remembering." Barry unfolded it slowly and nodded, emotion tightening his throat. "Would you like to put something in the box?" he asked the boy. The boy looked at him, astonished. "Can I?" Barry opened the lid. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a tiny plastic army man. Scratched and scuffed, its paint worn from love. "He was my favorite, but I think they'd like him better." Barry placed the toy soldier gently beside the medals, notes, and mementos of war. And just like that, the box grew heavier. Not with grief, but with legacy. Months passed. Fridays remained sacred. Sometimes 3 Marines came. Sometimes 15. Some were old, their hands shaky. Some were young, still adjusting to life after the uniform. Some said little. Others stayed late, trading stories in silence. Each one brought something. A name, a photo, a pocket-sized memory. And Barry received them all. Guardian of a growing archive of sacrifice. He never preached, never posted, never even brought up the past unless asked. But when he spoke, people listened, not because he demanded their ears, but because his quiet had earned their hearts. And in a world obsessed with noise, his silence had become holy. One day, a school group visited the cafe for a history project. Their teacher had heard the story. She brought them in, hoping they'd witness more than a lecture, maybe even a little grace. Barry met them with the same stillness he gave everyone. He told no war stories. He showed no scars. Instead, he spoke about loyalty, about keeping promises, about remembering the people who had given everything so others could live in freedom. One student raised his hand. "Why didn't you say anything when they were making fun of you?" Barry looked at him kindly. "Because I've held men in my arms while they took their last breath. After that, cruel words don't carry much weight." Another asked, "What do you want people to remember about veterans?" Barry paused, then said, simply, "That many of us are still keeping promises made long ago, on battlefields most people have forgotten." The room fell silent. Not awkward silence, not fearful silence, but the kind that stretches deep into the soul, the kind that changes how people move through the world afterward. And so, every Friday at 2 o'clock, the cafe remains still for a moment when Barry Romo rolls in. Customers stop mid-conversation. New patrons ask about the man by the window, and regulars stand, quietly, just for a second, as if saluting without raising their hands. The box still rests on his lap, still closed most of the time, still guarded like a treasure no one will ever understand unless they've carried one of their own. Inside it now lies dozens of stories, of fear and courage, of laughter and loss, of things too powerful to speak aloud, but too sacred to forget. And at table 3, every Friday, those stories sit shoulder to shoulder, not carved in stone, not engraved in brass, but carried faithfully in the hands of a man who made a promise and never let go.